Dying is supposed to turn us into strangers. Skin collapses, color drains. The face that once smiled and argued and laughed becomes something else, anonymous, unmistakably dead. And yet, in a vaulted crypt beneath Palermo, a 2-year-old girl who died in 1920 still looks like she's asleep. Her lashes rest on her cheeks. Her bow is bright in her hair. Tourists swear her eyes open and close over the course of the day, as if she's watching them. Across an ocean, in a bronze pyramid in Salt Lake City, a small religious group offers paying clients the chance to become modern mummies, bodies preserved indefinitely, waiting for science or spirit to do something with them later. And scattered across Europe in glass coffins and Baroque chapels, certain saints lie in state with skin, hair, and sometimes even fingertips seemingly untouched by centuries of burial. The record of decay is supposed to be predictable. These bodies refuse to cooperate. Tonight we open File 10-2, The Grateful Dead, Bodies That Wouldn't Rot. From the moment humans began to bury their dead, we have tried to cheat the chemistry of decomposition. The ancient Egyptians devoted a 70-day ritual to it. Special priests removed the organs most likely to rot, pulled the brain out through the nose with hooked instruments, dried the body in salt, and wrapped it in linen until the person became more artifact than corpse. Thousands of years later, Victorian embalmers injected arterial fluids rich in arsenic or formaldehyde to keep bodies presentable for funerals and photographs. Today, modern morticians still replace blood with preserving chemicals, set features into a peaceful expression, and build illusions of life for a few days more. Sometimes, though, preservation becomes more than hygiene or respect. It becomes a statement, a claim that the person represented should never fully leave the world. That's where the strangest cases begin. Not every preserved body is the result of human intervention. On the dry plateaus of Peru and Chile, high-altitude burials have produced mummies whose skin, hair, and clothing remain startlingly intact after 500 years. On the other side of the world, peat bogs in northern Europe have held Iron Age corpses so perfectly that archaeologists can still see stubble on their chins and rope marks on their necks. The chemistry is brutal but simple. Decomposition is driven by bacteria and enzymes. Cut off what they need, warmth, oxygen, and free water, and the process stalls. In peat bogs, acidic water, low temperatures, and a lack of oxygen tan human skin like leather and preserve soft tissue, while the same acids dissolve the bones underneath. The body becomes a kind of pickled relic, sealed in cold mud for millennia. In deserts, the opposite happens. Air is so dry that moisture evaporates faster than bacteria can work. Bodies buried shallowly may desiccate in place, clothes, hair, and even facial expressions frozen in the moment of death. There is nothing mystical here, only physics and chemistry, applied by climate. But natural preservation lays the groundwork for what comes next. Once people learned that some conditions could keep a body almost intact, they started trying to manufacture those conditions on purpose. The Capuchin Catacombs under Palermo are what happens when you turn preservation into a civic hobby. Beginning in the late 16th century, the brothers of the Capuchin monastery started drying the bodies of their dead on racks in a ventilated crypt. The air, mild and flowing, slowly desiccated the corpses. Over the centuries, wealthy citizens paid to join them. Today, the catacombs hold around 8,000 corpses and more than 1,000 mummies, some standing in their Sunday clothes, others lying in niches, arranged by profession and status. The most famous resident arrived much later. Rosalia Lombardo died of pneumonia just before her second birthday in 1920. Her father, devastated, begged a local embalmer, Alfredo Salafia, To preserve her as she was in life, Salafia agreed. He injected the child with a solution that he never fully disclosed, placed her in a tiny coffin, and sent her into the catacombs. For decades, no one knew exactly why Rosalia looked so uncannily alive. Then, in 2009, an anthropologist working in the catacombs found Salafia's handwritten notes. The formula turned out to be a blend of formalin to kill bacteria, alcohol to dry the tissues, glycerin to prevent over-desiccation, salicylic acid to inhibit fungi, and zinc salts to give the body rigidity. It was, in other words, industrial chemistry in miniature. Later, as humidity in the catacombs threatened her, Rosalia's coffin was moved and placed inside a sealed glass case, flushed with nitrogen. Between Salafia's injection and the controlled microclimate, the child's tiny face still appears soft, lashes shadowing her cheeks. The opening eyes that so disturb visitors have a simpler explanation. Time-lapse photography shows that changing light and camera angles reveal more or less of her irises through partially translucent eyelids. There is no movement, only a trick of optics amplified by grief and expectation. Here, the mechanism is clear. What is harder to pin down is why thousands of people each year stand in front of that case and whisper that she looks awake. Sometimes preservation is about power. When Eva Perón, Evita, died in Buenos Aires in 1952, she was 33 and already a legend. Her husband, President Juan Perón, commissioned a Spanish pathologist, Dr. Pedro Era, to embalm her for all eternity. Era replaced her blood with a cocktail of glycerin, alcohol, and proprietary chemicals, and sealed her skin with a thin plastic-like film to create the illusion of radiant sleep. For almost 2 years, Evita's body lay in a trade union headquarters where mourners could file past. Then a military coup overthrew Perón. The new regime feared her corpse as a rallying point. They stole it, moved it between secret locations, and according to later testimony, guarded it obsessively. For nearly 20 years, Evita's body haunted Argentina as rumor and symbol, supposedly preserved, hidden, and even mistreated, before finally being buried in a heavily fortified family crypt. The chemistry of her preservation is no longer mysterious. Modern embalmers routinely use similar chemicals, though without the political theater. But the way her body was treated reveals a deeper pattern. When a corpse becomes an icon, whoever controls the flesh controls the narrative. Lenin in Moscow, Mao in Beijing, Ho Chi Minh in Hanoi, the 20th century is full of leaders whose bodies have been frozen in glass for ideological reasons, maintained by teams of specialists who quietly repair and renew them every few years. They are not truly incorruptible, they are maintained. Which brings us to the cases that claim to be something more. Within Catholic tradition, incorruptibility, bodies that do not seem to decay, has long been seen as a possible sign of sainthood. Take Bernadette Soubirous, the 14-year-old visionary of Lourdes. She died in 1879. When her body was exhumed in 1909, witnesses reported that her skin was supple and her face recognizable. 10 years later, she appeared much the same. In 1925, as part of the canonization process, her body was examined again. This time signs of decay were noted, and a light wax mask was applied to her face and hands before she was placed in a glass coffin. Visitors today often assume what they see is untouched flesh. In reality, they're looking at a complex combination of residual soft tissue, careful conservation, and sculpted wax. More broadly, modern scholars and church officials acknowledge that many incorruptible bodies benefited from favorable burial environments. Dry crypts, cool stone churches, lead coffins that excluded air, or even earlier attempts at embalming. The Vatican, in fact, no longer treats incorruptibility as decisive evidence of holiness. That doesn't erase the mystery entirely. Some corpses really did persist in unexpectedly good condition for decades, but it shifts the language from miracle that breaks the laws of nature toward rare case at the edge of what we understand. From an investigative standpoint, we're back in a familiar terrain, unusual but not necessarily impossible. If ancient priests and political regimes used preservation to serve gods and governments, Summum uses it as a kind of spiritual technology. Founded in the 1970s by Claude Corky Rananau, Summum is a small religious group in Salt Lake City. Its headquarters is a bronze-colored pyramid tucked among warehouses and side streets. Inside, the group practices modern mummification and transference, a ritual they say guides a person's essence beyond the body after death. The process is secretive, but follows a recognizable structure. After a conventional funeral, the body is transported to the pyramid. There, according to Summum's own descriptions, their specialists perform an extended embalming, bathing tissues in proprietary preserving solutions, wrapping the body, and placing it in a customized metal or fiberglass mummiform. Pets can undergo a similar treatment. The stated aim is not just remembrance, but continuity. Summum literature suggests that preserving the entire body down to intact DNA may one day allow for cloning or reanimation, or at least provide a stable vehicle for spiritual journeys. Cost estimates hover in the tens of thousands of dollars. It is, in effect, a niche luxury service for people who want to step outside the usual funeral economy and into an ancient narrative of bodily permanence. From a scientific perspective, Summum's mummies are extreme versions of the same embalming principles that keep a body viewable for a week. From a cultural perspective, they show that the desire to resist decay hasn't faded. It's simply adopted stainless steel in legal contracts. When we line these cases up, the bog bodies, the Egyptian pharaohs, Rosalia Lombardo, Evita, the incorruptible saints, the clients of Summum, what patterns emerge? First, preservation almost always has a physical explanation. Dryness, cold, acidity, lack of oxygen, and the presence of certain chemicals all slow or halt the microorganisms that digest us once the heart stops. A peat bog is like a natural pickling jar. A sealed glass coffin is a controlled terrarium. An embalming formula is a carefully mixed poison for bacteria. If decomposition is a house exposed to rain and termites, mummification is the act of building a roof, sealing the doors, and sometimes changing the very materials of the walls. Even the so-called miracles fit partly into this frame. Bernadette's body benefited from a cool vault, layers of clothing, and later conservation work. Rosalia's uncanny lifelike appearance is the result of a very advanced early 20th century formula, plus more recent humidity control. Second, preservation is rarely neutral. Who gets preserved and why tells us what a culture fears losing. Egyptian pharaohs and nobles were embalmed because their society believed the soul needed a recognizable body in the afterlife. Victorian embalmers worked in an era obsessed with propriety and the acceptable presentation of grief. Evita's body became a contested relic in a battle over Argentina's political identity. Rosalia's near-perfect, tiny face has transformed a private tragedy into a public shrine. Summum sells mummification to people who want to hedge their bets, spiritually, technologically, or both. Third, some gaps remain. Not every incorruptible can be fully explained by environment or intervention, at least not with the data we have. In some cases, records of burial conditions are incomplete. In others, later conservation work is poorly documented. Legends grow in the space left behind. That's where interpretation diverges. One reading says this: All preserved bodies are products of known or knowable processes. If we had full records, exact temperatures, soil chemistry, embalming formulas, microclimates, we'd find nothing that breaks the laws of thermodynamics. The real mystery is psychological. Why we need certain people not to rot, and what we project onto the ones who do not. Another reading leaves a crack open. Maybe most cases are chemistry and craft, but perhaps, in a few, the coincidence of environment and intention hints at something stranger, where reverence, ritual, and the material world interact in ways we do not yet have language to fully describe. Not supernatural in the Hollywood sense, but not fully reducible to lab notes either. Both interpretations face limits. Neither erases the simple, unsettling experience of standing in front of a glass coffin and realizing that the person inside has been dead longer than anyone alive has been breathing, and yet still looks back at you with a face you could imagine speaking. Walk back through the corridors of the Palermo Catacombs. Dust hangs in the air like static. Row after row of desiccated faces, some collapsed into bone, some half-wrapped in the fashions of vanished decades. Then, in a small side chapel, a tiny coffin under curved glass, and the illusion of a child asleep. Or stand in the bronze pyramid in Utah, where a modern mummy rests in a sculpted shell, layers of resin, and metal insulating it from time, a bet placed on future science and unseen realms. In labs, in crypts, in pyramids, in bogs, we keep finding ways to hold a body at the threshold between person and thing. We embalm and tomb and display, trying to make peace with the idea that the people who shaped us can simply vanish. We haven't solved death, but every preserved body, natural or engineered, political or saintly, records our refusal to accept oblivion on ordinary terms. Somewhere between chemistry and devotion, between salt and faith, these grateful dead keep their vigil, and as long as they do, we'll keep opening their files, because every mystery hides a truth